All right, and we're back. Let's get right into this. This is the one that's actually going to now go and get uploaded. Welcome back, folks. Make sure the make sure you guys can all see me. You're on now, Miss BBT. You can see everything. Everybody should be able to hit refresh. Should be able to see the link that I put out on Twitter too, or it should say live. This is one thing I don't like about YouTube, and this is just critical feedback to YouTube. Your interface is just the worst compared to like Twitch. It's very linear if it works or not. There's no feedback into Stream OBS or none of that, so should be the last thing I tweeted. All right, guys, we're just going to go with it. Whoever gets to see this live, then you're good. And hopefully we can get to the live chat here in a second, and we can answer your guys' questions. All my other streams after this will probably be back on Twitch because YouTube is just not working very well for us. Sorry. It seems to be a common issue here. That one's not the live one. Like it shows that I'm broadcasting right now. I don't know who I'm broadcasting to because it doesn't show me online at all. That's so funny. Like, I don't even know if I'm live. It shows none of my subscriptions right now on my other account are live right now. Like, how is that possible, YouTube? Huh? You got there, but you're not sorry. All right, so we're just gonna go with it. Like, do we have folks in? 20. All right, we'll go with it. All right, you lucky 20. Yeah, that first test really kind of... I should have just went with it live when we went with the test. So are you bringing it up for you can answer chat? Awesome. Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead. All right, guys. So I'm going to get into it now. So real quick recap for anybody that was able to join late. We're going to be covering the asset layer of RavenCoin. And there's a few Medium articles that I have linked at the below of this video. That is going to be what we're going to cover first. It's going to explain to people that do not know anything about RavenCoin kind of what it is, what's the main benefits, what's it in comparison to other currencies that are out there, cryptocurrencies out there. Kind of, I guess, the part of the value add for people that don't know anything about it, and then some of the technological differences, and then what part of the roadmap of why there's kind of some buzz right now with RavenCoin, and that's obviously having some effect on price. Part of that might be some of the Binance listing and that kind of thing too, but there's a lot of things that are listed on Binance that don't really have a growth rate that Raven's seen, especially when it was challenging Bitcoin's total volume output, I think in the last 24 hours, that's by itself is kind of crazy talk. So what we're going to do is click over to the Medium article first on that. And this is kind of gets in, this is from Wellpool, or it wasn't Wellpool, it was Well Reports, sorry. Well Reports, which explain kind of what Ravencoin is. The only reason why I'm bringing this up is it's a recent article, and they kind of just go over the basics of it. So as a new person, if you don't know what Ravencoin is, essentially it was they took Bitcoin Core code, forked that, which doesn't mean that you split it off of Bitcoin. It means that you take the code base and you create a copy of it, and then you start it from the Genesis block, the very beginning. So you're not taking it as the way forks usually work, is you've had the blockchain that's been going on for a while, and then you split it from a certain point. None of the history in the Bitcoin blockchain is in the Ravencoin. It's just the code. So I want to make sure that there's a difference there. I've seen some folks that go out on Twitter and they're like, oh, it's a fork of Bitcoin. So, do I already have Ravencoin? And I wanted to make sure that people understood the differences. If you take that code base and you make a copy of it, and then you make some changes and change the name and put a different logo on it, and then you start it from scratch, you have a new chain from that part. So that's essentially what Ravencoin is, with some tweaks that came in initially. Some of the very first tweaks that they had is they changed the amount of Ravencoin that would be issued out on each block. They essentially added a couple zeros to everything, right? So instead of 50 coins per block, like the way Bitcoin started, it started with 5,000. And then that's also going to have a halving point that continuously will have over a schedule, just like Bitcoin. So right now it's at 5,000 coins per block. And that's going to change over a period of time too. It's so many blocks, and I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's like 2014. Somebody can correct me in chat, but there's so many blocks that occur, and then it halves just like Bitcoin. With that, there was a roadmap that was presented essentially from the folks that started the concept of what Ravencoin would be bringing, and what that came with what their vision was to build an asset layer, something it's called color coins that are on that were started essentially on Bitcoin back in the day, to start to try to write information that you wanted to store in an immutable fashion that would not go anywhere, right? That would always be there. You could always refer to it. There's an entire use cases. If anybody that was from the early days of Bitcoin in the 2012, 2013 days recite and remember any of the, like Stefan Mafala, I cannot pronounce his last name, but there's a really interesting person out there that has put out a lot of content around the Andre Antonopoulos days of when he was really making the track out there to educate people on Bitcoin, that put out some content that was looking past just the fiduciary side of something what Bitcoin could provide. And what that came to is, like, if you could store information in an immutable way and leave reference to assets, leave reference to, linkages of property, linkages to things that were not just in some centralized database in one company, right? There was a whole entire concept of what you could use the Bitcoin blockchain at that time for. And what was found is that while you could do these things in Bitcoin, you would have these situations where if you didn't include the original asset as part of the transaction in Bitcoin, you could lose that. You could lose that attachment of information to that, because as the way Bitcoin functions with its unspent transactions is you have to include that, because it's like change. Like, I'm giving a $20 bill back. I'm going to pay for something that's $10. I'm going to get that asset, plus I'm going to get my $10 return. That's the unspent transaction return. You do not, if you don't include the origination of that asset with that part of that transaction, you have a chance to lose that in Bitcoin's blockchain. So it makes it a little more cumbersome if you're trying to code around that and store information. And as Bitcoin's price has risen up, trying to facilitate transactions in that manner on Bitcoin, it started to become less and less of an ideal blockchain for those purposes, not dismissing the fiduciary and storage of value concepts, and even from the transactional nature when you start looking at layer 2 solutions such as Lightning. So you take what RavenCoin's done, and it laid out essentially a roadmap that said, hey, this ideology of color coins and voting and all these other secondary and tertiary features that were the origination of some of the ideas around Bitcoin, why not have some development specifically for those components in a separate chain that was designed to facilitate those particular things, to augment what was existing, do it off of a baseline of code that has been proven over the past 10 years, and then leverage off that work that's been there. So that's essentially where RavenCoin has kind of manifested from, and it put out a roadmap of some of these features that it was going to do. And what's been going on since essentially January 3rd is a knocking down of those claims of saying, hey, we're going to do this, and then they put it out, and then, hey, we're going to add this features and functionality, and we're going to pivot when there's a risk to 51% attacks, right? RavenCoin was on top of it. That community supported updates and changes, such as dark gravity wave, which is an ability to adjust itself on the difficulty and help protect itself against 51% attacks, those type of things. So like the community is active. It's trying to address the problems as they come, and it has that strong sense of I keep saying community, but people that are active, that are trying to better the ecosystem. So I come from a perspective of the mining, the proof of work side. I've always been attracted to that style of production. So it's on the essentially production of the currency side, and the validation of the information that goes on transactions on that network. And that's really what this channel's been always focused on, is trying to let people know from a very pragmatic way of how can I put a graphics card in a machine and participate in this network, get a token, and then also now expanding into how do we use that currency. What's the point of it? What are some other use cases with it? So you guys probably see this rain of RavenCoin keep flowing in here. This is on the testnet, so don't get your hopes up, boys. We're not sitting here rocking out at 5,000 RavenCoin every couple minutes or every couple seconds, or like that one just looks like I got a couple there. I'm getting some test coins for us, and I'll show you guys how you can do that yourself too. So essentially this first article that I linked in there is the kind of background behind Raven. They do a pretty good explanation of it. It's ASIC free using the X16R algorithm. What this means is it's resistant right now. There's probably a good chance that somebody out there has probably built a bit stream around a FPGA. I would have no doubt at all, especially with the pricing that there is. And if there isn't anybody that's done an FPGA on this privately yet, I would imagine they're feverishly trying to do it right now. Why it is ASIC free technically right now with the exponential growth that's seeing, I would assume that there's going to be quite the effort to try to put together an ASIC for this. But the basic ethos coming from this is saying that if there's a risk of ASICs or people that are going to produce ASICs, essentially the community is saying we're going to change the algorithm. So much in the way that Monero did change on its algorithm now a couple times. And Siacoin just recently did. I put that one in kind of like the hybrid version, since Siacoin's still using an ASIC. It's just their ASIC. The basic ethos is that it's going to remain ASIC free. So we'll see how that goes with the development community upkeeping that. Again, no pre-mine. The Genesis block essentially was launched. That's the start of a blockchain. It starts off with that first block, that first transaction, and then the validation of that transaction. So it was no pre-mine. Nobody pre-bake that. Now there's a lot of people that would be contentious to say if you had knowledge of when it was going to start and you had miners ready, you could just fire it up day one. Technically that information was all submitted to everybody, and if you were understood on how to set up a miner pretty quickly, you could connect to that network. Now, while I heard about RavenCoin prior, essentially around the time of launch, I want to say I heard it in December that it was coming, but there was a lot going on in December from all the different cryptocurrencies, especially with Bitcoin being at all-time highs. It did get lost in a lot of the, I would say, static of that time, but I did hear about it myself on the 14th, 15th, when we were in North America Bitcoin Conference. So whenever that range of time was early January, and then I think we made our first video on the 21st of January on participating in and trying to make sure everybody else knew how to participate. So that's where that fair launch comes from. We were never paid nor endorsed to do RavenCoin. I've never. There is a RavenCoin. What is it? Donation address that I have, that I've had on all my videos since the beginning. It's the same address. You guys can go out there and see if anybody's ever donated. It's it's all open and transparent. It's open blockchain. You can see if anybody's ever donated or how much I've been quote unquote donated for my time on it. I haven't received any other currency from that. I mine it myself, and I show you guys how to too. So none of these videos are sponsored by anything. Individuals may ask about price and do price checks. It's developer agnostic. So essentially developers are just writing code for it and submitting it. You know, they obviously can partake in it if they want to try to make it better, and also invest in it if they, I mean, it's free and open, so you can make that choice. The report here talks about this as being Counterparty 2.0, which is essentially that color coin concept where you can store assets as part of the original chain. October 31st is when this is launching. And then these are some of the other items that are on the roadmap for RavenCoin. So this is kind of a good recap, I guess, of RavenCoin to make sure that some of the newer folks that are just trying to understand it. While this type of video has been produced by several people multiple times, being close to the asset launch, I want to make sure that everybody that's new knows that they're watching something fresh and understanding. So some cool features on the RavenCoin protocol: unique asset creation. That's the piece that's coming out on the 31st. Dividends, messaging, and voting are additional things. So dividends will be part of the sub piece of the asset creation. We're going to see that here in a minute when I get into the asset creation piece. And then how you could create subordinates to that, sub assets, and then unique assets under those. And then how that essentially you could create some dividend structures off of that would go live later. Messaging would be essentially if you're trying to store some kind of private encapsulated messaging on chain. And then obviously voting which would be like through like a carbon kind of vote where you're pledging assets, or you're staking the fact that I own this. You can prove that I own this, and I now have voted for this person or this thing, and you're stamping your identity essentially with this part of that carbon quote unquote vote. There's options and functionality coming with that. And then obviously they get into the challenges along the way where you have like nice hash and some of the centralized mining concepts coming to where you can have a pooling of mining power that I think is a discovery that's been going on for 10 years of how do we handle where you have conglomerates coming in and taking over the mining power. How do you keep it decentralized and incentivized to stay decentralized, that type of thing. And then there's some resources on that which shows you guys how to get to wallets. I don't know about this desktop wallet, so I'd be sketch on this until I've done some research on it. Zeltrez.io. I don't know anything about this wallet, so be cautious on that. I can't endorse that in any capacity. But the RavenCoin Core wallet, iOS wallet, and Android wallet are all ones that I have, and I can say with pretty decent confidence the ones that I use right now that I think are doing fine. But yeah, that Zeltrez.io, I don't know anything about that one yet. So proceed with caution. And then some basics of who to follow on that community. So that's that piece. Are there any questions before I get into the kind of the second thing is kind of flow? How? Yeah, technically you can. If you have a testnet, you can point the GPU to it. You don't really need a GPU to do it. This machine here, it looks like I'm at 130,000 coins right now. And I just turned that on before I started this. So it's only been running for a little bit here, and I've already earned 130,000 coins, RavenCoin. They're still immature. They're still working through their verification right now, but under the debug window here, that's how you get into this. So we can kind of get it right into that unless there's any other questions. If you have the RavenCoin core wallet. Here, I'm going to close this right here. Let's stop the process, and then we'll go through it from the beginning real quick for you guys. The folks that can debug window console. Let's set this to false. And I'm going to walk through what I'm doing, guys, so don't freak out. So we're going to turn that part off. We're going to validate that it's powering down those cores. 2%, I can hear it calming the machine down. Okay. So we're going to close this down. I'm going to show you guys how to get into this piece here. But before let's get into this. Is there any other questions before we move on? Nothing, everything clinical? Okay.
You're up to 118 minutes because you had it listed as unlisted.
Oh, I had it unlisted. Oh, nice. That would make sense. Sorry, guys, for those folks that didn't get a chance to jump in. So this was just put out by Tron today. It's a 4-minute read, but we're going to go through this quickly, and then I'm going to bring it up into the app because by that time, some of those testnet coins should be matured to where I can start to use those and create some assets with you guys. But Tron just put this out. It's one of the lead developers on RavenCoin submitting and that group that they're part of, submitting a lot of the asset layer piece code for this. Before, I want to make sure I make something clear. These guys are uploading this information. All of this code that's being submitted is open source. So the effort that's being applied on the RavenCoin network with it having the core of Bitcoin, and if Tron or any of the guys are in the chat, you guys can respond, at least the developers, that other teams, Litecoin, other folks could technically implement the code that's being submitted on this because this is built off the Bitcoin core infrastructure. I mean, Bitcoin Core, Bitcoin Cash, any of the core main, infrastructure that came from Bitcoin could implement these features because this isn't like a company-owned piece. This is them writing code, looking down a roadmap, building a brand essentially that not only do they believe in, that they plan to either build the tools for and then make sure the community knows how to use those tools to build things. But other coins could obviously import some of this stuff and then make some tweaks and update, and you could create, an entire ecosystem of atomic swaps between those two, between chains and that sort of thing. So it's open source through and through. So, any of the features that we're talking here could technically be implemented in other coins too. But, let's get into some of the detail of what we're about to go into in the wallet once we have some mature coins here. So as he says here, when we're experimenting with the asset assurance, you have a checkbox that says reissuable. And if anybody that's followed us in the previous videos, I did create some assets, deployed those assets, created a naming convention. I think we were making a joke as like a BBT coin. And then we put a denomination with that of how many would be issued. And then there was a issuable flag there that you could check in the very beginning when you create that. And what he's doing here is explaining what that means here. So if you play with the asset assurance on testnet, you probably should. If you've experimented creating assets, you have issued an asset or two, but didn't see any difference when you checked the issue or not issued. Why is that? The simple issue is it is a default setting with a flag on the asset that you should see that says you can continue to change these three things. So here's the point of it. If that flag is selected, these are the three things that you can do after you've created your asset. You can increase the quantity of the asset issued. You can change the metadata associated with the asset, and then you can increase the divisibility of the units of the token. So that's the 0.000 if you have the 8 divisible numbers like the Satoshi level, right? Or if you're just 0.00. It's what? How many do you want it in quarters? Do you want it in 1/100ths? That's your divisible units there. So if you have that flag there, you can actually issue changes to that information, right? So why would you be able to change these? Only the asset owner can. How does the system know who owns the asset? That's the cool part. Every time an asset is created, except a unique asset, there are additional token created. The additional token has the same name as the asset with an exclamation point at the end. Here's an example of that. If you were making the lemonade token, that it has a lemonade and then an exclamation point at the token that's also issued. This token gives you the special holder powers. Among the powers, the ability to change 3 attributes. Those 3 attributes up there. So Tron goes on. I like how he's answering this in here and explaining it. So if you might be thinking that sucks, the owner can increase the number of tokens willy-nilly, and you'll be right. So that's why that reissue option is unchecked. So if you're creating something that you're going to want in a future state, because let's say you're parking essentially the asset, you are going out there to register your token, whatever asset class that you're going to create, and we're going to get into some use cases. But you're not ready. You don't have the tech spec of how you're going to implement that right now. What that option's giving you is the ability to go out there and essentially pre-register your stuff. You're going out there saying, I want BBT token. And I know I'm going to change some features at some point in there of how many are out there, what it's divisible by, maybe some metadata that's associated with it. But I want the option to be able to change that. That's a good feature if you're looking at future state. If you're trying to immediately come off and say, I'm going to create an STO, a security tokens offering, and I am creating this entire baseline and it's going to be fixed. If you have that flag checked and then you're going off and saying it's a fixed thing and it's not, I mean, that's where it kind of comes into. So having the ability to edit that piece of information, which is kind of critical setup in the beginning, is kind of nice. So that explains kind of what that's for. In the beginning, why is it useful for an owner to make their token not issuable? The benefits really for the token owner. The token issues have enough self-control that they won't be able to reissue tokens accidentally under a drunken stupor. So essentially, it just gets into the point of why you would want to lock that down, and then also the the cases of having the division and the separation of it. You guys can read that. I'm not going to read all of this to you. I just wanted to make sure that you understood what that essential box meant when we get into it. And then it gives you some use cases of examples of the divisibility piece here. And then some details around that. And then what if some changes of the metadata is reachable the token? Well, the chain will store its references to all IPFS. IPFS is interplanetary file system, which is kind of a mesh network of storing information across a decentralized fashion. And it's actually a lot cooler than that, but we'll get into that in a different video. That needs its own video to explain. Documents, because of the blockchain, is permanent and immutable, but the user interface for most clients will probably only show the latest document. Blockchain explorers could show an audit trail of all the documents. Is it possible to reduce the number of tokens? Yes and no. There isn't a way to recall the tokens, so the number can only increase, but the holder of the tokens, including the issuer, can send the assets to the proverbial burn address. The proverbial burn address is a valid RavenCoin address for which a private key does not exist. So essentially, what he's talking here is there's a burn address, and you can see it below there. That's like below where it's RX burn and then a whole bunch of X's, which essentially mean whenever you're creating an asset, you're sending 500 tokens to this address that there is no private key to. So you're essentially burning them, quote unquote. And it's an audit trail to say, I paid for the rights to create this asset. And then that goes into a burn. So that comes out of circulation. So it's while you have a decrease over time, just like Bitcoin on the inflation, where we start with 5,000 coins and then we'll go to 2,500 coins and then we'll go to 1,250 coins. It's going to have a natural decrease in the inflation rate. You also have a burn feature, which right now Bitcoin doesn't have. The only burn feature I would say Bitcoin has is when people accidentally lose their tokens, or the initial folks that were in Bitcoin in the early days, including myself, that had tokens in an address or a wallet, and then either lost the hard drive or just didn't put a lot of thought in storing and saving information at that time. In the early days, especially in the late 2010s, when the tokens weren't worth that much at all, or Bitcoin wasn't worth that much, you have essentially a burn in that way with Bitcoin, to where people have either lost or their information. But that was kind of involuntary, where this is a voluntary, where you're creating an asset. on demand, and you're paying in 500. So there is a math problem out there that somebody that's probably a lot smarter than me on doing an equation of how many assets theoretically could be produced. That's actually a pretty easy number. If you divide it by the existing outstanding tokens divided by 500, you could get to a number of how many physical assets as of right now you can have on 2.1 billion tokens, which is about where we're at right now. But as you start to burn that, you're less and less on the supply side. So, and additionally, and I think Bruce Fenton said this most eloquently this afternoon, or today I seen on Twitter, saying that, you know, that initial launch of the RavenCoin asset feature, there was probably a handful of people that had plans of different assets they were going to create in lieu of future production plans of doing things around those assets and those names. But now that the price has risen in the fashion that it has, there's going to be a little more thought process probably put into of just creating a whole bunch of different names on the main net, purely and predicated on the fact that right now it's about $25 to create an asset right now on the RavenCoin network. And probably like 3 or 4 days ago, it was about $5. So it's went up on about 4x right now, almost 5x. And you know, it's obviously speculation can drive it. FOMO can drive it. It's way over its current volume weighted pricing average right now. I think right before this started, I think it was right around 840 Satoshis is where the kind of volume weighted pricing was at. And it was over 1,000. So we'll see how much higher that gets. And then that's going to really set up like how many people are going to make, you know, their asset, or how many assets are going to be created right away because of the pricing. So I think it is an ecosystem. There is an equilibrium that's established with that. And then if there's a lot of demand on creating assets in the future state of what companies and folks are going to do, being able to see that burn is going to, I think, also be another indicator that's not necessarily out there with other tokens, to where you can see that burn rate of tokens, you know, versus like gas or transaction fees, which usually are associated with other blockchains, where you can see a transaction state of the amount of transactions between people, but that could just be people trading things, where this is going to be a different level of saying, if you see these 500 coin transactions to the burn address, you're seeing essentially somebody out there has made a decision to create an asset. So they're leveraging the blockchain in a different way that's measurable in that fashion. And if you take waves and some of the other asset creation side, you can also take that with Ethereum. The difference is that you're not necessarily burning Ethereum with that on each of those, where you're wrapping in the gas transaction to broadcast to the network, and then that gets included in as part of the mining fee. So there's a unique number there that's not fully unique to Raven, because there are other asset burn concepts out there. But I think with the volume that Raven's pushing right now, it's going to pivot a different look, a lens on what Raven's adoption is, you know, from that standpoint. But again, not financial advice. I'm just trying to lay it out there as I see it and as I hear it and understand it. It's not always right, but it is at least gives you guys a vision of kind of where I'm at mentally with what I'm talking with Raven. So let's see here. We have any other discussion points before I get into the asset creation stuff here? Anybody needs anything? If there's any super chats or anything that to answer?
Just saying they appreciate that you brought RavenCoin to them back in January.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, it's always good. So let's get into so if you have the RavenCoin wallet, and there's a lot of tutorials out there how to get to it, but once you have the RavenCoin core wallet, you can go out there and type, when you start to type RavenCoin in, if you're using Windows, you start to type RavenCoin like you're going to launch the wallet. Under one of those options is going to be the testnet. When you launch that, we're going to get into creating a RavenCoin asset. Let's see if any of these. All right, so we have 100,000 Raven that now has been asset balances. Looks like some folks have been sending me
Yeah, they've you some coins.
They sent me some coins, and they've sent me some assets here. We received another 10,000 here. That's pretty funny. Trump, Tether, ETH, nice. Clarencedollar. There you go. You guys are using it. So we can see that we have 100,000 right now, Raven, in the test wallet, and we still have 130,000 in mature. We have a total of 230,000 that are coming right now, and we have a little more that's coming in here. It looks like 5,000 just now finally matured. So if you have the testnet wallet and you want to start to get some currency, there are a few different options. There are some I would call it faucet services that'll give you coins to start with. But I mean, this is an i7 processor computer. It's kind of an older i7, and you can see on the testnet in literally less than an hour, we earned ourselves just using the processor, the CPU, over 100,000 RavenCoin. So you can go into help and then go into the debug window, and then under console, and you can type in one command, set generate a space, set that to true, and you can, if you have like an i7 or an i5, you can set that to 4, because that's going to use the 4 main cores. It's not good to set it to 8 because those are virtual cores. You want to set it to the 4 true cores that are on a machine. You could have an i7 that has 6 cores or 12 cores, depending what kind of i7 you have, if you have that on your computer. Or you could even set this to 1 core and just let it churn for an hour or so, and there's a high chance you'll probably win a block. But if you set that to 4, and then it's going to just start leveraging that local CPU on your computer to generate you some tokens. And you can see right here we're at 50% performance on these 4 cores. What that's going to do is it's going to take that and it's going to thread it across all 8 cores. So the 4 cores plus the 4 virtual cores on an i7, where this has 8 logical processors. And then it kind of just distributes that load. And essentially you're running the proof of work algorithm, the X16R, on the CPU, which is you're participating in the RavenCoin testnet network. It's the same as participating on the RavenCoin mainnet if it was pointed to the mainnet. And you can earn yourself some tokens to play with. We'll let that run, and we'll see if we get any more, just to show you kind of the speed that occurs at. We're going to close that part, and in the background you'll see that it'll say that we've been awarded tokens here. So this is the mainnet wallet right now, or this is the testnet wallet, but this is the same way that the mainnet. So look here, we just turned that on, and we just mined another 5,000 Raven on testnet. So if we go in here, you can see overview, send, receive, transactions, and assets. And then what we're going to look at is when we click on the asset piece here, this is the creation window. This is the initial release of the asset creation management screen. So under here you can create an asset, and right here you can see that it's a main asset. It's going to cost you 500 Raven. Then you have sub asset, and then unique asset. And as we create this, so I'm going to start to walk kind of through a basic use case, right? So most of this stuff is tied in the fiduciary side. It's meaning that you're creating something that you think maybe valuable, and that's just where your mind's at on creating assets such as tokens and tokenized securities to that, where you're saying I own a company and I'm going to issue out so many shares to that company, and I'm going to create it on the RavenCoin network. You can think of other things with this, and I'm gonna take it from a perspective of like a game asset. So like on the main asset, or if I'm going to spend 500 RavenCoin, I could create an entire ecosystem of tokens that are at a kind of a higher level, called like the main asset layer. If I take a game like, let's say, that I've created like EVE Online, ISK is an in-game currency in there. That could be at that main asset layer, right? To where you have an ISK to an asset, as an item. So like if I go in here and I say I'm going to create, and this is probably breaking some kind of rule here, but ISK RVN has some invalid here. ISK RVN. So I'm going to create something that's like that, like a daughter app to it, and then I could assign so many of those tokens to myself. And mind you, I'm using this as an example. So I'm not saying go out there and copyright infringe on Eve, but I'm just saying if you're going to create a game asset on its main layer, and then you issue so many tokens under that layer, that's the total ecosystem. You could then create sub assets underneath that as like a paired set with that, to where you'd have like a tree set up of different sub assets to that ISK. So you could have another like if there's a global currency that's ISK, and then you have different sub currencies that are part of the different participating, let's say in that concept, the guilds or clans, and that would be corporations. They could have their own assets in that. So you'd have a global reconciliation level, and then you would have the sub levels of those that then could all roll up, right? You can create the essentially the ecosystem of sub layers within an asset generation. And that's the kind of point of it. And then you could create unique assets at the lowest level there that are specialized. So the point of, people are like, what are all the different use cases of creating assets on a blockchain? Like, why would I do that? What's the point of it? Is trying to steer away from just the concept of, the fiduciary side, the cash side, the value side, where you can create information and the exchange of the transaction side of that information, leveraging the RavenCoin network of those tokens, like the transaction between addresses that are moving that other asset around. Previously, I used an example of like DKP, which is drag and kill points. I think that's a great use case for it, where you have a participating group of people that every Tuesday log into a video game, and for their participation, they essentially get awarded a token for their participation. Right now, that's called drag and kill points. And then if you're all working towards a goal, and then you beat that goal 2 weeks later, how do you distribute the rewards of that effort that folks were together on? Typically that's done in a spreadsheet, and that's called drag and kill points, where you could have this, not just saying you need an immutable network to do this, but if you're talking about a shared spreadsheet, or you want to give people a lot of different access, you could create, as a guild master, essentially your token ID, issue out a ton of tokens that you can make a change reusable. Let's do that use case here. DKP clan 1. We're going to make initially let's make 1 million of them. That's enough. It would be kind of cool, the mouse over here, that it would tell you like 1 million, 1 billion. That would be kind of cool. Shameless plug on making a change to wallet QT. And then you can make that reissuable, to where you can make changes to it later, and you wouldn't want that many decimal points in here. Let's say on that one, you're only going to go to 2, right? So you can see that one full unit is only going to be, because you're probably only going to be using quarters on that, right, on this particular asset class. And then we're going to go out here and we're going to create, and then this would be the holding this asset. You must own this asset address. So we're going to need an address. Can I click behind this? So you're going to want to have that address before you create. Nope, that's a Medium article. Let's go back into here and let's get an asset name. So on my receiving addresses, let's say asset DKP. Let's copy this address, because this is going to be the anchor essentially for that asset. Create asset DKP. Plan 1. This address that I own. How about a control V? And let's do 1 million of those. 10,000, 100,000, 1 million. I do want to add a JSON meta hash to this at some point. We're going to have to come in and redo that. We can check availability. It looks like it's green. It's a valid asset. You have to click that to say that it's good. That's the address. We're going to create this. And then this is going to show you the transaction fee for this. To create 1 million of these that are going to be assigned underneath that, it's 500 of the RavenCoin that's going to come out of this balance that we have down here. And we're going to say yes, and now it just submitted it. So we just submitted that to that address, in issue 1 address, XXX. That's where it sent the piece there. It was broadcasted to the network. Now that's going to come into here. And there is that amount, transactions. That's that first, that unique asset that comes in that shows that's the change, the reissuable one that we were just talking about. And then here's the 1 million that's been broadcast to the network. It's had 0 confirmation. So it's got to broadcast to at least 5 nodes and get its confirmation. This is part of that whole proof of work piece that we're all validating that we've done this content on. Well, once that comes in here, we're going to stop this because we just keep earning coins here, and I'm competing with everybody else that's trying to do this for no apparent reason. Let's come in here and stop this miner. We're going to come in here. We just did an up arrow on here, and we're going to remove this to true to false, and we're going to tell it the 404, and we're spinning that down. And let's get, and we can see this asset coming down here. Asset balances. This is a new little logo here that was not there before. Display assets you are the administrator of. So it is giving you a BBT rocks my socks. Nice one, sir. I like all these little assets that I'm getting. So you guys are seeing some transfer. We're seeing it in real time. Other people sending me some assets here. And you can see that people have sent me different things here. And the different transactions that are coming through. You can see that we've mined all these. We can see that coins are coming in right now as they're coming through. And now that we've created those. So what you would do in that use case, where I now have that as an administrator of that group that's playing that game. And I mean, again, this is one of many use cases that you could do. You could do this with internal processes. You could have this entire, now mind you, this is transparent, right? So you can see the different assets that are deployed out there. You could have this as the name and the coding out there. You could have as just a code name, right? So, if you wanted to use this network and those transactions and that transfer of those assets in a cryptic way, you could create a naming convention that you and your participants know of, but are not necessarily transparent when it comes to the naming convention, right? Where people could go back and talk to, like, hey, this group here and their name, and this is how many are those things worth something. But you could create that entire ecosystem of transactions that you can then tie to an application and then have this ability to include participants worldwide on a network you do not have to maintain. You could create a node, which is just a transaction of information and the storage of the transaction history. Or you could participate with a mining computer, single GPU, and have that in your office or in your building or whatever, and then have that as a some of these names coming in are hilarious. Have that as part of the your ability to be able to transact and quickly pick up transactions and validate locally too. I mean, you don't need that. You just would essentially download this wallet on the mainnet and be able to facilitate all your needs initially through the mainnet wallet. If you had your own development group, you could make custom applications that could interface with the blockchain, with the RavenCoin blockchain, and then have an entire asset management, because that spec being produced out there is open source, and you can see that technical spec out there. So again, it's a features and functionality of being able to host that activity on the mainnet and be able to participate initially right away, and that could be said for a lot of the different currencies out there, right? That's not just Raven. There's other currencies that you could create some basic metadata and participate on their networks too. But from what's being produced here and then how you can go out there and create interaction points, I think is pretty strong and valid. Seeing how that's going to manifest on the mainnet, I think is going to be very interesting. I mean, I know I'm going to go out there and register a few tokens, and I know that it's going to be a fight on day one to try to register BBT. Somebody out there is probably going to jump ahead of me and pay $25 to have that ahead, and I will let people know if I'm the one that created it or not. But it's, it's interesting to see on how that's going to work on the STO, the security token offerings, is there going to be in a whole an ICO 2.0 events that are going to occur on Raven, who knows. But that initial feature set that we're seeing how the management of those asset screens, this first initial look here to where you can manage your own assets and stuff, this is pretty rudimentary right now in the very beginning state of it. Seeing how that manifests in IPFS tools and being able to store certain files, and then the cost and the storage are related to, you can upload a PDF with your asset here to show like a text back. I mean, there's things that you can do in addition that I would like to get into, and what I'll end up doing is having a separate stream. We'll probably do that one on Twitch. Hopefully you guys will like the YouTube live stream, but we'll include a file out there, and we'll get into the IPFS, the storage of information, actual file information, binaries out there. BBT, you snooze, you lose. I like all these little tokens that the people are creating to me. To see how that stays out there and functions, and the information that's going to be associated to that. And so I'm going to take some questions before we can get in there. I think I showed some people, and it's the community actually is out there using it right now. They're sending me all kinds of different assets here. And I was going to get into some more detail here, but maybe we'll save that one for a Twitch stream.
Is there a secure method for selling an asset to another person, or will we have the same you send it first, no, you send it first?
So the question is there going to be a secure method to be able to transfer assets to individuals, like if they're going to exchange it for some kind of value, I would assume. And right now, initially, until there's some level of exchange secondary support there, like much in the way like Ethereum had the ERC20 tokenization, and then so you would have wallets and exchanges and Shapeshift and all these different functionality that would then allow the transfer of those assets. The functionality for that getting included with an exchange is probably, I don't know predictions on what it's going to take effort-wise for an exchange to allow that participation, but essentially this is a tech standard that's being updated to Ravencoin. Any of the participating exchanges right now are going to have to update their baseline to this version of Ravencoin anyway, for them to extend that second layer. While it would be effort like anything, it's questionable if they would let certain tokens be added to that, because then that would denote that there's some kind of exchange or value in there. I think it comes around the teams that create those tokens or those assets on the ecosystem. So if you have a company or an entity that has now created some kind of distribution on the Ravencoin asset layer, and then that is how you interact or get that utility from that participant, then that would work in the same way that getting Golem added to Poloniex or any of the other current exchanges. Like Poloniex was a bad example because Ravencoin's not on Poloniex, but on Binance or any of those other things, that would be the rationale that they would have to work with those exchanges to get it on there. In the beginning, it would probably just be OTC, which is over-the-counter stuff, and then some kind of other facilitation. Probably the first adopters is if there is a crypto bridge or a DEX that's created around the concept of Raven. I mean, that would be somebody that would probably be putting together some kind of decentralized exchange system that would be doing the asset transactions. That would probably be your first phase of that, I would assume. But yeah, in the beginning, if you're trying to trade it for value, you got to be super careful on that, obviously, because you're become a money transmitter at that point. If you create some kind of asset and then you're trying to get money for that, you're essentially, if you're at least in the U.S., you're probably breaking all kinds of laws. So it'd be real sketch on that. The use that I'm going to be using it for is going to be one, using it as a use case of an example of what it could be done from a development standpoint and storing information. The fact that the asset is there is essentially is the transaction fuel that I'd be using for the metadata that would be included in the transaction. And that's kind of the point of being able to store it with an IPFS, to where I can start to facilitate certain activities and essentially a register on a immutable blockchain that is worldwide, that I could have like for somebody to participate in it would be downloading the Qt wallet and then having a basic interface of being able to send and receive assets initially into their wallets. So then if for the exists like that example of the DKP, to where if we were issuing out participation value and then they wanted to redeem that participation value into like winning the next item in the game, they could do that, facilitating through RavenCoin's network. If you start just talking pure fiduciary that, hey, I'm promising you value growth and here's a token that will value grow, if you give me something else, you're running that risk of, hey, you're transferring monetary value, not just information. We got any other questions? What are we up to?
157. We got up to 174, I think.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to make sure that we at least had one stream out here. I'm going to try to do at least one a week on YouTube for the YouTube community. And then obviously we do most of the streams or after stream. I might end up having one later on tonight. I got one more machine to put together that I was going to put on Raven, and maybe we'll do that on Twitch later as just kind of an open stream, no agenda, just building a piece of hardware. And maybe we'll just try to see if I can get it working on testnet. I mean, that'd be kind of rude, I think, in a way, because if I put a full mining rig on testnet, I think I'd probably like quadruple the network hash rate.
When the asset feature is turned on, is the network going to get hammered and slow down a lot?
That's a great question. Is the asset feature? So the question was, when the asset feature gets turned on, how is it going to be is the throughput and the transactions of the network going to slow down? Is there going to be the network going to be hammered with filling up blocks and that kind of thing? It's a good question. It depends, I think, on the activity and what the threshold of transactions per second can reach. It does have a limit, just like Bitcoin. So it's got more throughput, but not like exponentially more throughput. So we'll see on how much participation comes out on there, and we'll be able to see, hey, do network fees go up because of it? Right now they're really, really low. But we'll see if it does have a hit. I think I had this configured on here. This is on the main net. Yeah, this is a single.
On the testnet, can administrative ownership of an asset be transferred?
Can administrative ownership of an asset be transferred? From my understanding, it can be, as long as you have that flag checked and you can send that original token, I think. I don't know that fully, though. That's a great question. Why is this running so slow? If we have a developer in there, we can get that answered, but I will put that in the description after I find that. I believe you can, as long as you have that checkbox. But if not, then you just got to send all the tokens over. If you have it set as reissuable, you're definitely going to want to be the owner of it. Let's try 24. I think that's why it was set way too high. Got any more questions? I know you guys got some questions. There's 100 people in here.
You made a list of the different GPUs and what they hash on.
We've had a few lists out there. If you look at some of our previous videos, there was one that I kind of cover multiple GPUs. I believe it has a 1050, 1070 Ti, and 1080 on the picture. Like this right here is a Vega 64. And it's an older version of Nevermore. I don't know if there's any more releases, but this is anywhere from 11 to 14 mega hash for a Vega 64. I think we can optimize and get this all the way up to 15 mega hash for like a Vega 64, and it puts out quite a bit of power though. I mean, we're at 300 watts here for the full system. It's about 250 just for that card, 225 somewhere around there. But I can go through it real quick with you guys. Let me get this main camera. So you got essentially your RX 470, 480, 570, 580s that go anywhere from 5.4 mega hash for like the 570s pretty consistently, all the way up to 9 mega hash on like I have some MSI RX 580 8 gig cards that do about 9.14 is where they kind of level off at. I've had them over 10, but they never stay stable over 10 mega hash per card. But if you're anywhere between that kind of 7 to 9, you're probably pretty decent on your AMD cards. The GTX 1060s through 1060s, I believe, are about 5.4. I have some 1060s right now in there at 7. They're doing 51 right now. Mega hash, let's see here. They're at 51 for the whole rig right now. And there's 7 1060s right now. 51. Yeah, 7.2. So I'm about 7.2 per card on the 1060s. Those are 6 gig 1060s. And then the 1080s are around 12 to 15 mega hash. And then the 1080 Ti's are about anywhere from 18 to 22 mega hash. I think with the latest enemy, they're maybe closer to 25. The Titan V is just crushing it. I mean, it's a very expensive card. Don't recommend buying a Titan V for that, but it's up to 39 mega hash, almost 40 by itself. So it really just tears through the Raven. RTX 2080s are around 28 mega hash, if I remember correctly. I have those in another box. And I have not tested the 2080 Ti's yet. And so when I get back, I'm going to Ethereum DevCon at the next week. So Monday next week, Sunday, I'm flying to Prague and going to be at the Ethereum Development Conference, sitting down, doing some architecture stuff and talking through a lot of the Z-Snarks, sharding, a lot of the advanced features that are coming out in what you could call, I guess, Ethereum 2.0, but it's more than just Ethereum. It's more of just like the ecosystem in general from a development standpoint. I'm going to be in a few of those sessions from an architecture blockchain side. We'll be bringing some live stream from there. I'll also be discussing more of kind of a developer architecture. I've had a lot of requests from folks wanting to get into kind of like a development and architecture discussion of how to participate and get into the space. No Jimmy Song. I'm not going to be out there teaching you on how to code. I'm more on the architecture side of things, but looking at the bigger picture and then how things will fit together. But I'm trying to make sure I understand on how what the advancements that are coming down that pipeline is. So I'm going to be out there at Ethereum DevCon. When I get back, I will be setting down with some of the newer tech. So the 20th of work is starting to make a tear back. Usually in the winter, every winter, for some reason, it just, a winter for the U.S., it seems to always start to get some interest when it comes back into proof of work. So if we get into kind of a bull market and the proof of work coins start getting back into a pretty decent profitability level, we're going to see more and more mining stuff come back. So we're starting to see that already with Raven on the NVIDIA side. Shard? Yeah. That's I didn't come up with the name, man. That's just what they're calling it. It's like sharding. It's a thing in computer science. It's a thing in a lot of other things too. For the folks that are doing that. Any other questions? We'll wrap this one up. If you guys don't follow me on here, you should. I'm going to try to at least do one live stream a week on this platform. Otherwise, we are usually on Twitch doing live streams, and then I usually take that content, kind of work through it from a post-production standpoint, and then I post it as YouTube videos. This was kind of a shell shop across the top. I'd like to go one more layer deep on this asset layer stuff before the next software update for it, and this goes live on my mainnet. I'd like to get into the kind of the JSON, the metadata that we can put into it. I think that'd be an interesting thing for some people, for the developer side especially. We can maybe get into one more stream with that. But next week, again, we'll be in Prague, so I'll be live streaming from there. We'll try to do one on YouTube. I just lost my viewer here on watching the popcorn became more important. So is there any more wrap up before I call it?
No, I said thanks for this thing. Keep tweeting.
Awesome. Yeah, and follow us on Twitter. Like, for reals, dudes. Like,
what miner do you use for Raven?
Enemy for most of the NVIDIA cards is the miner that I use for the NVIDIA cards, and then Evermore for AMD. All right, guys, we're going to wrap this one up. Unfortunately, with Twitch, I could send you guys somewhere, but on this one, we're just going to wrap this one up on the YouTube, and we'll make sure it's posted. Peace.